Hey, I'm Tom and I'm going to show you how to create this animation using SVG and React Spring. It's a little bit more tricky than it might seem because animating scale and rotate transform properties is a little bit harder in SVG compared to HTML. First, we need to grab an SVG image. Go to undraw.co and search for private data. Then download the SVG and copy its contents. Right before we start animating an SVG, it's usually a good idea to extract the parts of the SVG that we are going to animate into separate components. In this video, I have already done that for you, but if you don't know how to go about it, I have covered it in detail in my previous video. I've also set up a trigger state variable and a button to trigger the animation. If you have some previous experience animating using React Spring, you might think, oh, this animation is really easy, I'm just gonna animate the scale and rotate transform properties with the useSpring's hook and apply it onto the SVG icons. This sounds like a perfectly reasonable thing to do, so let's give it a try. First, import animated and use springs from React Spring, then scroll down to the main animation component. And we are going to get the springs as a result of calling the useSprings hook. We want 3 springs, 1 for each icon, and we'll be animating the transform property. So when the toggle variable is truthy, we want to set the rotation to 0 degrees and the scale to 1 so that no scale is applied. And when the toggle variable is falsy, we want to set the rotation to 360 degrees and set the scale to 0 so that it scales down and disappears. Now that we've created the springs, let's go ahead and apply them onto the SVG components. We are going to map over the springs, return the animated.g element, pass the style property to it, and finally pass the respective icon as its child component. The one last thing to do is to replace the icons variable down in the SVG code with the newly created animated icons variable. Let's go have a look at what we have created. Well, the good news is that it's definitely doing something, but the bad news is, well, kinda obviously, it's not animating the way we want it to be animating at all. Let's have one more look at how the animation is behaving, and I'm going to play it at slow motion. You can see that all 3 icons are revolving around one point located in the top left corner, whereas you want them to be rotating around their own center points. In order to understand why it's not behaving the way we want it, we need to understand what the transform origin property does and how it differs for HTML elements and SVG elements. As per the MDN docs, the transform origin property sets the origin for an element transformation. What does it really mean though? I believe it can be best explained in a combination with the rotate property, where it defines the point which an element revolves around. The tricky part is that for regular HTML elements, the default value of transform origin is 50% 50%, which corresponds to the center of an element. For SVGs, however, the default value of transform origin is 0, 0, which corresponds to the top left corner of the SVG viewbox. The following animations should give you more visual intuition for what's going on with transform origin. In the first animation, we are animating the rotate property of an SVG rectangle, which has a default transform origin. You can see that the rectangle is rotating around the top left corner of the viewbox. You might think that in order to fix it, you need to change the transform origin from 0, 0 to center, so that it behaves the same way the transform origin behaves for HTML elements by default. If you apply this fix, however, you'll be disappointed, as you'll see something like this. The rectangle is revolving around a center point, but not its own center point. Instead, it's rotating around the center of the SVG viewbox. Fortunately, there is the transform box property to our rescue. It is supported in all modern browsers. It specifies what the transform origin property should relate to. The default value is CodeSandbox. However, we can change it to fillbox, which makes the transform origin property relate to the SVG element itself rather than the viewbox. Now is the time to apply what we have learned. In addition to applying the animated style to the animated.g element, let's also apply transform origin center and transform box fillbox. Hit save and let's see how we stand. So the icons are now rotating and scaling properly. Nonetheless, the original animation feels a little bit more playful, as the icons are not animating all at once and they are bouncy. To add the staggered effect so that the icons are not animating all at once, let's leverage the delay property. We take advantage of the fact that index is passed to the map function, which enables us to set different delays to different icons. Let's find out if it works. So the delay is getting applied properly. Now let's add a little bit of bounciness. To add bounciness to the animation, we need to change the spring animation config. The friction property specifies how resistant the spring is going to be. What it means for the animation is that the lower the friction, the more bouncy the animation is going to be. The default value is 26, so let's try 16 instead and see where it goes. If we now play the animation, it finally looks like the original one. If you would do this animation in framer motion instead, it would be probably a little bit easier, because framer motion takes care of applying the scale and rotate transform correctly even for SVGs. In framer motion, you define variants instead of using a hook, which you then pass to a motion.g component and change them using the animate property. Another popular option for animating in JavaScript is GSAP. It is a more general library and it doesn't have first-class support for React, so you have to take care of more things manually. Nevertheless, it has a slightly better support for animating SVGs than React Spring, as you don't have to use the transform box property to make rotate and scale animations work. So that's all that I've got for you today. I'll be very happy for any kind of feedback and hope to see you in the next video.